Hi, everyone. So, today we're going to talk about the neuroscience of attention. And one way to begin this discussion is to look at medications we currently use to treat processes in which there are deficits or impairments in attention, such as in ADHD. And many of our treatments, many of our medications actually are very effective. We currently use stimulant medications, and there are also non-stimulant medications. And actually, what both these medications have in common in terms of their mechanism of action is that they both work on norepinephrine and dopamine systems. So what they do specifically is that they increase the availability of norepinephrine and dopamine in certain parts of the brain, usually the prefrontal cortex aspects of the brain. And that is how we think they work and how we think they help improve attention. But why is that? Why does affecting norepinephrine and dopamine help improve attention? Well, some experts and some of the ideas currently is that norepinephrine and dopamine help control signal to noise processing in the brain. Get a sense of what that means. We could think about a population of neurons where you have some neurons that are relevant to some information or event in the environment or in your brain. You could think of other neurons that are not quite relevant to that task at hand. And the notion of signal is that there is a high signal to noise ratio when the neurons that are relevant for the information at hand are the only ones active, and the neurons that are not relevant are quiet, so they do not have action potential. So yeah, you have a high signal to noise ratio. You could imagine a situation whereby neurons that are relevant for the information at hand are active, and the neurons that are not quite relevant are also active. And so there will be confusion in this state where the brain doesn't really know how to discern or select salient information. So that's the concept of signal to noise. And the whole idea is that when you have reduced levels of norepinephrine and dopamine, you don't have signal that is properly boosted, and you also have noise, or rather you have an inappropriate level of noise. So this affects the ability to pay attention on relevant stimuli. That's just a simplistic view of it, and that's how I try to make sense of our psychopharmacology of our medications currently. Now, we could go to a more anatomical or a functional neuroanatomical level. And there is a model of attention called the Posner model of attention that breaks attention into three components: alerting, orienting, and executive processes. Alerted processes basically has to do with a kind of state of arousal in which you are anticipating relevant stimuli. Usually the alerting processes involves a system called the reticular activating system. It's a system that's involved in keeping one awake. It comprises the 5 major neurotransmitter systems in the brain. Dopamine and norepinephrine are members of the reticular activating system. The orienting system involves 2 networks. There's a top-down or dorsal stream network that involves regions such as the frontal eye field and also the parietal lobule. Now, the dorsal or the top-down attention is basically when you intentionally or volitionally direct your attention to a relevant stimuli. And there is the ventral attention network. This includes regions such as the temporal parietal junction, and this is when something in the environment grabs your attention. So it's more bottom up. It's more when there is something relevant that causes you to refocus your attention. And then you have the executive processes that's involved in prioritizing information, in selecting information. This could involve parts of the prefrontal cortex, like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the dorsal, and some parts of the limbic system, the dorsal anterior cingulate region. And there are experts who may split attention into selective attention and sustained attention, with selective attention being mostly related to the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and sustained attention be more related to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So this is just an anatomical view of attention. And finally, my favorite perspective, this is a networks perspective. It's a little bit more modern. And this uses the triple network model, which we might have discussed in some other video, that involves three major resting state networks: the default mode network, the central executive network, and the salient network. Essentially, these three networks are involved in major cognitive states of a human being. So the default mode network tends to be active when you're mind wandering, not paying attention, engaging in a kind of social thinking or autobiographical thinking. This is usually when, say, you're in a class and you're not paying attention, your mind seems to be somewhere else. The central executive network is involved when you're trying to solve a problem, solve a task. This is when you're trying to sustain attention. And the default mode network and the central executive network, as you can imagine, it's like go in opposite direction. When the default mode network is active, the central executive network is basically underactive, and vice versa. The salient network helps switch between these two systems, or between these two networks. It's also active when there's a behaviorally relevant stimuli in the environment. So you could intuitively see how these networks will be involved in attention. And you may guess, and you'll be correct, if you assumed that in a process like ADHD, a psychopathological process like ADHD, you have hyperactivity of the default mode network, which is a network that is active when your mind is wandering, when you're not paying attention. And that is what we indeed find in neuroimaging studies. And then you have underactivation of the central executive network. The network is that's involved in paying attention. And also, actually, there is underactivity in the salient network. So it's almost as though you have a poor ability to switch from this mind-wandering state to a more attention or a more task-focused state. And finally, you also have hyperactivity of your sensory motor systems, which I think seems to fit the phenomenon of hyperactivity we find in ADHD. This is just a summary, a very brief introduction into the neuroscience of attention.